Remember, you're going to have to stand up or raise your arm. What do we talk about providence? The story of Joseph is a story of providence. God promised Abraham in Genesis, the 15th chapter, that his people would go into captivity for 400 years and be led out with great possessions. The story of Joseph is how God is going to accomplish his purpose. He had a goal in mind that he was going to accomplish, which was to bring his people out. And we say that's providential. What does providence mean? Josh?
It's kind of described as anything God does to ensure that his will comes about.
Okay. Does anybody know how many times providence is mentioned in the Old Testament? I guess no answer is an answer. It's not mentioned. 0. Joyce is back there. She's not going to speak in class. She's shaking her head. It's not mentioned. And that seems odd because we talk about it all the time. The closest statement about providence, and we will get to Genesis 42, is in Genesis 22:14, when Isaac is spared from being offered. Abraham says that he would name the place and the Lord will provide. And it says, and in the mount of the Lord to this day it is provided. That's the closest thing we have. The New Testament, it's used twice. It's used once in Romans, the 13th chapter, verse 14, where it says, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision to fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's dealing with us. We shouldn't look ahead to the lust of the flesh and use those things that are under our control to accomplish and satisfy that desire. The other place that it's used in the New Testament is in Acts, the 4th chapter, if I remember my password, in verse 27. Actually, the other place that it's used is in Acts, the 24th chapter, and verse 2, where Tertullus, the orator, is condemning Paul, but praising Felix when he says, because of you, we enjoy great peace and prosperity in the land, because of you, most excellent Felix. And what he's saying is that Felix as governor, through his providence, has secured peace and prosperity for the land. And the idea is that Felix had a goal, which was peace and prosperity. As a good manager, he used those things under his control to accomplish his purpose. That's it for providence. But in Acts, the 4th chapter, and verse 27, this is what providence looks like. For truly against your holy servant, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, were gathered together to do whatever your hand and your purpose determined before to be done. All those players in the crucifixion of Christ were because of God's divine plan, and by his providence it was carried out. And that's what we're seeing in Joseph. Very quickly, God's providential involvement can be seen throughout the Old Testament. If you talk about Assyria, in Isaiah, the 7th chapter, verse 20, Isaiah says that Assyria was God's hired razor. He hired Assyria to chastise his people. They would be the rod of his anger, the staff of his indignation. Followed by Babylon. Babylon in the 21st chapter of Ezekiel is called the sword of God. It is sharpened. It is unsheathed. It is going to be used to bring retribution against his people. In Ezekiel 29, Ezekiel says that God gave Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar as wages because he worked for me. Okay, so we go through the two main empires, and then we come to the Persians and the Medes. In Daniel, the 5th chapter, starting I think around verse 23, because Belshazzar does not glorify God, who holds his breath in his hands and owns all his ways, his kingdom is divided and given to Darius the Mede. And then of Cyrus in Isaiah 45 is called my shepherd. Cyrus in 44 is called my shepherd, and in 45 he's called my anointed one or Messiah. and I take him by the right hand. All these things were done by God to accomplish his purpose, to refine his people. And the captivity that we're about to look into as it progresses, he wants his people so alienated in society that they are not affected by outside influence. And the Egyptians were so different to their way of life that they did not accept their gods, they did not accept their worship, and they became purified for him. Now we get to Genesis, the 41st chapter. As Ethan closed last week, it says, "The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine was severe in the land, so all countries came to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was great." And we see this in the book of Ruth, that Naomi and Elimelech leave Bethlehem because of a famine and go to Moab so that they can live and not die. So this morning we're going to be talking about Joseph in Egypt. I don't have any slides this morning. Jocelyn's out of town. Joyce just got back from Ireland, England, and Scotland, and I didn't want to burden her. But if you look right here, that's where Goshen is. The Nile flows here, Goshen is here, they're up here, they come down, and that's where they're at. So, the other thing that's interesting is we're going to talk about some dynasties really quickly. It appears at the time that Joseph is in Egypt that the Hyksos or Hyksos are in rule in Middle and Lower Egypt. Now, when you read Middle and Lower Egypt, we think Southern Egypt. That's not the way it is. According to the map, Lower Egypt's up here, Middle Egypt's here, Upper Egypt's down here. And the reason is because of the Nile River and the Delta and how they looked at their maps. So it is believed that the Hyksos are in control at this time. And what that term means is it can be translated shepherd king, or it can be translated king of foreign countries. They were Hittites, shepherds, who had come from the north and conquered, as we would say, the northern part of Egypt. So then as you read later on where it says the Egyptians would not eat with shepherds, the Egyptians loathed shepherds, they were an abomination to them, it was because they were a conquered people. Some also say it's because of food. Egyptians were vegans. Canaanites were carnivores, and we're still fighting that battle today. If you would look at Genesis 42, it says, "When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, 'Why do you look at one another?' And he said, 'Indeed, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die.' So Joseph's 10 sons went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, 'Lest some calamity befall him.' And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. Then he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. And he said to them, 'Where do you come from?' And they said to him, 'From the land of Canaan to buy food.' So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, 'You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land.'" What jumps out at you so far in this narrative?
That Benjamin is important to Jacob.
That what?
That Benjamin is important to Jacob.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
Well, that's his Joseph is Benjamin's only true brother, and as far as Jacob knows, the only surviving son of his beloved wife, Rachel.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to, we come back to favorites again. And he said, "Lest some calamity befall him." I don't know if there's not some thought in Joseph's mind or in Jacob's mind that Joseph disappearing was not an accident. I don't know. It just says he's concerned about the welfare of this child. And as Gary points out, it's because, one, he's the sole surviving child of Rachel. He is the son that he named the son of my right hand. So we see that. What else do we see? What are the brothers doing? This is like my kids when there's yard work. Why are you sitting around looking at each other? We're starving to death, and you guys are doing nothing. It also seems that they have quite a bit of money from the text. And so he's going to send them on a journey to Egypt to buy food. Now, this is a significant journey. Most, if you Google it, most experts say probably 6 weeks. It's 250 to 300 miles. But according to the text, they didn't use camels, they used donkeys. They're not very fast. And this must have been a large caravan of donkeys to carry enough food to feed the multitude of people that he has in his family and his entourage. So they go down to buy food in the land of Egypt, and it says that Joseph was governor over Egypt, and that his brothers bowed down before him, and what does he remember? His dream. You wonder, this has been a long time that they've been separated, but he still remembers in this instant the dream that he had, that his brothers would bow before him. Yet it says he acted as a stranger, so they did not recognize him and spoke roughly to him. He questions them on why they came, and what does he charge them, accuse them of? Being spies. And this would go along with the Hyksos rule in Egypt, that they have been conquered by shepherds from Canaan. And now we have more shepherds from Canaan coming in and scoping out the land. Yes?
This is also, you made a good point about him remembering the dream. It also speaks greatly, I think, to Joseph's character, right? I mean, he remembered the dream. His brothers are sitting there bowing down to him. And what he told them would happen and why they got so upset at him for saying that actually came through, which is the truth. He could have at that moment revealed himself. He could have said, this has happened, this is what I told you would happen. Oh, by the way, you hated me for saying that, but it came true. But his character came through, his love, his empathy, his grace for his brothers. And we're going to see that he starts crying several times. He has to leave the situation and cries several times in this chapter because he's so overcome with emotion. So he could have done something different in that moment, but he didn't.
And what we don't know is how the hand of God is involved in this. How much does Joseph know? Joseph seems to go out of his way to get his family to Egypt. It could be immediacy in the fact that there's a famine in the land and they're all going to starve to death. Or it could be something that God has revealed to him. Or he could be aware of the promise made to Abraham that they would be in a foreign land for 400 years. And this is going to help accomplish it. We don't know, but the hand of God is at work in all of this. And that's the key point. So then he accuses them of being spies. And I think what I just said about the Hyksos gives credibility to why. This would not be something that, no, you're a spy. No, you're a spy for good reason, because we had a Chinese spy balloon. So now there's all kinds of spy conspiracy theories. I would have shot it down earlier, just because I like to shoot. But there is concern on his part. And using that as a platform to propel the interrogation is, okay, tell me about yourself. And I love this statement. And it makes me think of how I look at myself sometimes. Their defense in verse 10 is, they said, "No, my Lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's son. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." So much for self-evaluation. We are honest men. talking to the individual that they sold into slavery and expect to be dead. As we continue reading, it says, "But no," he said, "you have come out to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the son of one man in the land of Canaan, and in fact the youngest is with our brother today, and one is no more." That's a nice way of putting it. You know, you don't want to explain what happened to him. You just politically correct say he's not with us. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place unless your younger brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely you are spies." So he put them together in prison for 3 days. Then Joseph said to them on the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain and famine to your house, and bring your younger brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and you shall not die." So in this, he masks over the fact that he wants a reunion with his younger brother. He makes it so this is a means of finding out whether they are indeed honest, truthful men. And I think it's interesting when this takes place that he puts them all in prison to give them time to think about what's going on. As this unfolds, I don't see how anybody could doubt the veracity, the truthfulness of the Bible. The narratives that are given, the accuracy of the accounts, the logic involved, to me screams of a great God. Oh, by the way, I don't want to single anyone out, but I was going to say at the start of class that I get so many cards from Tommy and Julie that I'm afraid they're going to want postage reimbursement soon. So if anybody wants to help out, I had a cardiac cath on Monday. I used to tell people, Joyce and I were only together 17 days when we got married. People seem to think that's a short courtship. And I always say, when the Grim Reaper's on the porch getting ready to ring the doorbell, you don't mess around. Well, I've changed that. Now that I'm getting older, I think the Grim Reaper's driving around my neighborhood looking for my address. So there's hope. But I appreciate the prayers, I appreciate the concerns, I appreciate the thoughts. Some Wednesday nights I'm not here because Adam's not doing well. Some Wednesday nights I'm not here because I'm not doing well. Sometimes my voice falters, but that's a heart thing. It's not laryngitis. But I appreciate the time that you've given me. So he leaves them in prison for 3 days. This third day thing could be significant. Is Ross here today? Oh, did you have your hand up? Oh, just checking. He says, starting in verse 18, it says, "Then Joseph said to them on the third day, 'Do this and live, for I fear God.'" The word used there is Elohim, which is the same God that they worship. He's not saying I worship a God. He's not saying I worship a pagan God. He's saying I worship God. This is the same name for God that is used exclusively from Genesis, the first chapter in verse 1 to Genesis, the second chapter in verse 3. And it's normally translated as God Creator or God of Israel. And Joseph is saying to them that he fears the God of Israel, God Creator. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain of the famine to your houses and bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified." And they did so. And they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw his anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear him. Therefore this distress has come upon us." What do we learn from that short verse that we hadn't known before?
They're still feeling guilt from it.
They're still feeling guilt from it. What else? That he pleaded with them. The first account of him being sold into slavery is very sterile. They throw him in a pit. Some Ishmaelites come by. Don't kill him. Let's make some money off of him. Good riddance. Here he says, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear him. Can you imagine your younger brother in pain and anguish crying out to you, and you don't listen? We talk about shadows and images. You could think about Christ here, crying out in anguish, crying out in distress, pleading with the Father, and they didn't hear him. They let it transpire. And God let it transpire, and it had to be hard. This has to be something that, I mean, even if you didn't like the kid, I mean, there's some kids I've met. Well, I'd trip them if nobody saw me. But anyway, that's a different problem that I have. But you would think that over the years, this would haunt them from time to time, that their brother pleaded with them for life, and they gave him, as they saw it, death. And Reuben answered and said to them, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against this boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. And it seems like he chose Simeon. I don't know why. It may be because he was one of the four of the firstborn, you know, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And Reuben did plead for him. Reuben, according to the text, had made a challenge to their decision and tried to save him. And Simeon was next in line, so he's the one that's chosen. But for whatever reason, they hold Simeon. But they understood or felt that this was all because of things that they had done in the past. Anybody have any questions or comments to this point? Again, there's a lot going on here, and I keep thinking providence, providence, providence. They're going to go back to their father. They're going to take their grain and leave. And to understand how much of an endeavor this was. So it says in verse 25, then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them possessions for the journey. Thus they did. So they loaded their donkeys with grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? Gary? What jumps out at you in this? Yes. I thought you were going to raise your hand. I was going to be preemptive. I'm not proactive. I tend to be reactive. So.
No, they're concerned that they're going to think they stole that money.
Because he's been challenging them as to whether or not they are honest men. What do you do? What do you do if you find somebody's wallet? I look and see if there's any money in it. I still give it back to them. I just want to know how, thankful they're going to be. But it goes back to this honesty thing. What do you do? Do you just cover it up? Do you keep going? Take what you've got and go? Do you go back to Egypt to give the money back and then be accused of being a thief? And then they say, what is this that God has done to us? And they also said that they had blood guilt, which blood guilt hasn't really been discussed a lot, but they realized that they are guilty of the blood of their brother. And that's weighing on them as well. It says, then when they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who is Lord over the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father at this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know if you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your household and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was found in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin from me. All these things are against me. He sees a dwindling family. They're afraid because now they have all their money and all the food. And if the famine is as severe as it's portrayed as being, they probably realize they're going to have to go back at some point. And this is weighing heavy on their minds. So they were afraid. It says, and Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring them back to you. Put them in my hands, and I will bring them back to you. How's that for a promise? Well, I'm not sure he has much skin in the game. You know, if I don't accomplish this, you can kill my sons. Later on, as we look the next few chapters, it is Judah who becomes an assurity with his own life. He gives his own life for his brethren, or willing to give his own life for his brethren. If you look in Genesis 49, one of the charges against Reuben is, one, he slept with his father's concubine, but it describes him as unstable as water. And I think this kind of shows the instability. And I think what's said earlier in the chapter shows the instability, because it says Reuben was the firstborn. Reuben should have been the one who was the voice of the brothers by birthright. Reuben's the one that pleaded with them to not harm the boy and to spare his life. But he didn't do anything about it. And so his father is going to say, you are as unstable as water. So when he makes this rash promise, it's more or less overlooked. It's kind of like Jephthah in Judges. Anybody remember what his promise was? Facing battle, asking for God's help, says whatever comes out of the door, I'll sacrifice. Unfortunately, it was his daughter. So, it says, but he said to my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. I think that's another dig at the other brothers. I don't want to lose Rachel's only surviving child. If any calamity befall him, the youngest, in the way that you go, it would bring my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. How would you feel if you were the other brothers? There's 10 of us. Simeon is in prison. There's 9 of us. Dad says we're not taking the youngest because that's his favorite fair-haired boy. And I guess we're just going to all starve to death in Canaan. And so it's going to unfold. We're a little early, so Anybody have any questions or comments to this point? Yes.
Why do you think they even bring up to Joseph, obviously they don't know it's Joseph, but like, no, we're servants, we're all sons of one man, we're 12 brothers, but one of us is dead, one of us isn't here. Like, what is that proving? Why do you think they brought up even the fact that they're all brothers, but not all of them here, but let me tell you how many there are, and all that. It feels kind of a non sequitur. There's a reason.
I know if I was under interrogation and somebody had a bright light and a rubber hose, I'd tell them anything they want to know. That's just me. I mean, they are in a foreign country with foreign customs. I don't really follow the news. I read news topics, but I don't try to get hooked up on the news. I don't. If the world ends, somebody's going to tell me. But the journalist that just got 16 years in Russia, I'm sure by the end of things, he'll tell them anything they want to know. I hear their prisons aren't nice and might say anything. But typically, when somebody is taken prisoner, they are interrogated. And what they're trying to establish is they're not spies. We're not like the Hittites who came into your country as shepherds and then took over. And this area is the land of Goshen, was very rich for cattle, for grazing, for herds. And from my understanding, if you can trust the internet, the Egyptians were vegans. They had cattle. We know that from the dream that Joseph had, or the dream that Pharaoh had that Joseph interpreted. They had cattle. But they typically used cattle for milk, and they used sheep and goats for wool. And that's it. And they actually consider lamb sacred. On the other hand, you have the shepherds who will eat anything that holds still. And this is one of the reasons that they hated shepherds. It is because of their lifestyle. So when he starts interrogating him, they're trying to convince him that they're not like the shepherd kings ruling Egypt at this time, to differentiate themselves from being aggressors or potential enemies who come in and try to see the nakedness of the land. If you're the only country in the world with food, you need to worry about somebody else taking it from you. Are any kids in here? Does anybody remember Y2K? What was supposed to happen? The end of the world. Well, I used to work in Gainesville in this, for lack of a better term, kook, used to come in, and he would talk about survival. He would have 55-gallon drums of gasoline in the back of his truck. He would have canned goods. He had a generator, and he would tell us all about Y2K and how the lights were going to go out, and he's going to be the only one in the world ready for it because we were all had our heads stuck in the sand. And so one morning he's in there and he's just going on and on and on. And I'm like, and another customer comes in and he starts the same dialogue. And he goes, "Are you prepared?" And he said, "No." He goes, "Well, what are you going to do when the lights go out?" He said, "Well, I'm going to get up and listen for a generator and go over and kill the guy and take everything he has." And he turned white as a sheet and left. I think that's maybe not the best biblical example, but it's the same type of situation. Somebody has what you have. The human response, not the godly response, is to take it. And Joseph is using that position of being in charge of all the stores of Egypt, of protecting Pharaoh's assets. And that's what you would expect him to do. And the more information he can gather from them, I'm not an extended family person. Like, I don't know anything in my family going on besides me and Joyce and our kids. I don't know if my mother had any sisters. I don't know my father's brothers' names. I only met, I don't know my grandparents' names. So I'm kind of isolated. And this is terrible. I don't care. Because they have no effect on me. They're not Christians. They're all dead. Which seems kind of callous. Joseph wants to know what he's been missing. Joseph wants to know about his family. Joseph has had over 17 years to think about what's going on with his loved ones, whether they're healthy, whether they're alive, whether God has blessed them. And the only way he's going to find out is through this news source, which are his brothers. And he's going to pump them for information concerning his father, his youngest brother, and where they are in life. And I think it makes perfect sense. It's the same questions I think I would ask if I were concerned. So, you might want to pray for me. I have been asked a number of times if I would serve as an elder. And I think that's an honor that all should esteem to. But I've always said that I lack the compassion.
See, one of the things that I think about with this too, in the interrogation, and his interest in Benjamin, is the fact that they have claimed to be honest men, but that he knows their past. He also knows that he was the son of Rachel, and that Benjamin was the son of Rachel, and for whatever reason, the only other son wasn't there. So I think part of this was confirmation that they just didn't bring Benjamin because Benjamin may have also done something with him.
He has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's not like he could follow him on Facebook, so the only way he could would know was to see, because it's not like he was getting information. So to me, I always kind of thought, part of this is, okay, you claim to be honest now, are you dealing with me honestly? Is there really another brother at home, or have you done something with him as well?
And he's going to make them verify whether their statements are true. I have one friend on Facebook, by the way, Joyce. But it goes back in closing when Paul says, examine yourselves to see if you're in the faith. When I go to the dermatologist, the first thing she says is, so tell me about what's going on. And I'm like, I'm paying you $200 and you want me to tell you what's wrong with me? And they will say, what have you found out from self-examination? Is there anything on your body that you're concerned about? And I say, being funny, I'm concerned about everything about my body. But then we look at the church of Laodicea, and they evaluated themselves, and what did they see themselves as? Rich and in need of nothing. So self-evaluation is only as good as the heart that's doing the evaluation. These men say we are honest men. Joseph is challenging them to prove it. So, it's good to see Carolyn back. I got to see her last week for that long. And I hope she's feeling better. Thank you for your attention. If you get a chance, look at the providential control that God has over things, over individuals, over nations. And to say one thing about providence is God is not making people do what He wants them to do to accomplish His purpose. He's using people and their dispositions to accomplish His purpose. And I think probably the greatest example, if you read Isaiah 10, it says, when he says that Assyria is my hired razor in the 7th chapter, in the 10th chapter he says, they seize and prey and destroy. He says, but it's in their heart to kill, to cut off, and to destroy. That was the disposition of the Assyrians. He used that disposition to punish his people. Then he would come and punish the Assyrians because of their cruelty and judge them as well. And the same thing with the passage in Acts the 4th chapter. He used all those things to accomplish his purpose, the crucifixion of his son, but they were all on board by choice. It's what Caiaphas said in John 11:50. It's expedient for one man to die for the nation. Expedient for one man to die for the people. So his was a political decision. God's was a divine decision. So just keep that in mind. If you're thinking God's behind the scenes and making these things come to fruition, he is not making anybody do anything against their will. The brothers did not throw Jacob in the pit because God made him. It's because they hated him. So, well, thank you so much.